The interior design world is changing every day. New building materials, colors, and furnishing styles. This means no matter how large your asset library is, you'll always be missing some of the latest trends. That's why as ArchViz artists, I think it's very important to learn how to make these things yourself. I'm Mason Menzies for Polygon.com, and today I'm going to show you how to create furniture using beginner techniques in Marvelous Designer and Polygon's new upholstery generator. So I'm going to start off in Marvelous Designer just to show you some of the basics of the tools in here. On the left-hand side, we have a 3D workspace, and on the right-hand side, we have a 2D workspace. Now, everything you create in Marvelous Designer will be created in the 2D workspace first, and then you'll manipulate it in 3D space. I'll show you what I mean here. I'm going to create a basic square, which I can do by coming up to our pattern creation tools here, which by default is set to a polygon tool. But I can click on it and drag down to a rectangle tool to create a square. To do that, I can just click and drag in the background to drag out any size square I want. Or I can just click in the background and it'll open up a window that will allow me to enter in custom measurements for the width and height. And when I've created that square, you can see it appears in 3D space. So to simulate this, I can come up to the top left and press this down arrow, or I can hit spacebar on my keyboard, and that will drop our fabric down to the ground like so. And now you can see we've got this little piece of fabric. You can manipulate it by clicking and dragging it, and that will allow you to make adjustments in real time. Marvelous Designer works really fast as it uses the CPU as well as the GPU for simulations. So that's pretty much how you make everything in Marvelous Designer. You'll make something in 2D space and then you'll make it in 3D space. So let's take a look at how we can create a pillow. To do that, I'm going to select this first pattern piece that we made here. I'm going to right click on it and come over to Reset 3D Arrangement. You can see that it'll reset it to its initial state like so. So a pillow isn't just one piece of fabric, it's two pieces sewn together. So I'm going to select this first pattern that we made here, and I'm going to duplicate it over to create the other side. To do that with it selected, I can hit Control-C and then Control-V, which will allow me to make a copy of it. And in 3D space, you can see we now have that duplication over here as well. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to spin it around, and that will allow me to put these two pieces back to back like so. Now, I want to sew these two pieces together, which is one of the best tools within Marvelous Designer, is being able to sew stuff. It's sort of the whole idea with Marvelous Designer. But there's a couple ways to do it. You can either do it in the 2D workspace, or you can do it in the 3D workspace. To sew, I'm going to select this tool here. It's called the Segment Sewing tool. It just looks like a little sewing machine with a dotted line below it. And what this will let us do is come into our pattern here, and it will allow us to highlight edges on our pattern. So this will let me select an edge, and then select another edge, and it will stitch those two edges together. You can see that with these relationship lines that show that these two pieces have been stitched together. And that's how you can do it in the 3D viewport. But you can also do it the exact same way in the 2D space by hovering over and highlighting an edge and stitching that edge to another edge, like so. You can see now I've got that edge sewn in 3D space. So I'm just going to sew these guys together here, like so. And now that they're stitched, I can simulate this. So let's press spacebar to simulate it. And now you can see that we've got a bit of a problem. This doesn't really look like a pillow, does it? It's sort of having a rough day. So I'm going to stop my simulation, and I can undo my simulation by hitting Control-Z a few times. And let's just take a look at what might have gone wrong here. So looking around my asset here, I can see that, yeah, on the bottom here, I've got this these two edges that have been sewn together, but they've been crossed. And that's something that you want to look out for when you're sewing in Marvelous Designer. So in 2D space, I can see that these two edges that were sewn together are crossed. I can see that by just selecting this edge here. And we don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to undo this seam that I sewed, just like so. So now it's gone. And how we accidentally crossed them is by sewing the wrong ends together. So we can highlight these edges like I mentioned and sew them together. But you can see when we're highlighting, we have another line here that shows up. As I move my cursor across this edge, you can see this line changes which side it's on. And this is something that you want to pay attention to when sewing together. What I had done is I had sewed the outside of this pattern to the outside of this pattern like that. And that created this crossed seam. So what I want to do is instead I want to sew the opposite ends to each other, like so. And now you can see that we've got these straight sewing lines. So if I come out here and press spacebar to simulate, now our pillow looks a little bit less shaky. But it doesn't really look like a pillow right now. It's very flat. And so what I want to do is I want to add in some stuffing to this pillow. So to do that, I'm going to select both pieces of my pattern here. And in our simulation properties, we can add in some pressure. So if I was to set the pressure to something like 20, you can see in our 3D workspace, our pillow puffs right up. Now we've got something here. This is looking much closer to what we're looking for. And that's how you create everything in Marvelous Designer. You'll basically start in 2D workspace and then stitch things together in 3D and then play around with it with your simulation. But one thing to note about Marvelous Designer is it is certainly not a modeling tool. Marvelous Designer is a simulation tool, and it allows you to create just fabric and garments, which means if we want to make something like a chair, which we want to do today, we have to do some of the modeling beforehand for the hard surface parts of our chair. The same goes for something like a couch. Couches, although they look like fabric from the outside, within the couch there's a lot of wood and cardboard construction going on. So if you wanted to make a couch, you'll have to model that base structure beforehand as well. Now I've gone ahead and I've already modeled the base for my chair here. And if you want to model something like this, I do have reference material linked in the description below, and you can use this to go ahead and model your own Husk chair. But if you just want to do the Marvelous Designer section and learn that, you can also download this base model and import that into Marvelous Designer. So I'm going to import mine into Marvelous Designer, and I'm going to go to File, Export here in Blender. I'm going to export it as an FBX. You can use OBJ if you want to, and that's what you're used to. I like to use FBX because if you've set up your scale properly within Blender, when you import an FBX into Marvelous Designer, it'll automatically set up that scale for you. So let's go to File, Import in Marvelous Designer here, and import an FBX, and I'm just going to select my model here. And under Import FBX window, we have an option called Auto Scale, and that's what I want to check here. That will make sure that my scale is correct for my chair. Now you might get this information window pop up, and that's just because Marvelous Designer is expecting you to load in a human avatar, but we're loading in a chair, so we don't need to worry about that. And now you can see in Marvelous Designer we've got our chair in here. So we can go about creating the cushions and upholstery for this chair. Now if we look at our reference material again, you can see that this chair is basically made out of a bunch of pillows stitched together, which is perfect. We already know how to make a pillow. But we do have a bit of an issue here, in that if we look at the pillow in our reference, there's lots of these nice big creases and wrinkles, and just generally more detail to these pillows. And if we look at our cushion in Marvelous Designer here, we're not really getting those details. It's kind of just this square looking puffy thing. So we want to get some more wrinkles out of this guy. And to do that, I like to think about creating stuff in Marvelous Designer the same way you would create it in the real world. Because most of the stuff you'll create in Marvelous Designer is something that you can create in real life. So in the case of a pillow, pillows have pillowcases. And right now we just have two layers here. We have this upper half and this lower half. And then within that we have stuffing. But we can create a pillowcase which will allow us to get a lot more detail. To create a pillowcase, I just like selecting the pillow that we've already created, and I can duplicate it with Control-C and Control-V, and that'll place it in the 3D space. And now I'm going to select all my pillows here, just like this. And I'm going to move them up in the 3D space just so I can see stuff better. So with this pillowcase that we've just generated, I'm going to select the bottom half. I'm going to move that below our original pillow, and I'm going to select the top half and move it just above the original pillow like that. And now you can see that these two pieces are already sewn together because we duplicated from the original. But we also want the pillowcase to be sewn to the original pillow, which I'll refer to as the liner. It's the liner that contains the stuffing. So I want to stitch the pillowcase to the liner. I can do that really easily in my 2D space with the segment sewing tool. I'll just sew these guys together like this. There we go. And now we've got our pillowcase sewn to the pillow liner. If I was to hit simulate here, you can see we've got a pillow with a pillowcase. But it looks really no different than it did before. And the reason it looks no different than it did before is because we took our original pillow and we duplicated it to create our pillowcase. But the pillowcase and the original pillow liner are the exact same size. So to get some more wrinkles out of our pillowcase, we want to change some of the dimensions of it. So I'm going to select both my pillowcase pieces here, and I'm going to come over to my property editor, and this is where we can start making adjustments. First of all, in the simulation properties, you can see we still have pressure, which I don't really want. I just want the liners to have pressure and stuffing inside of them. So with the pillowcases selected, I'm just going to remove the pressure. You can see our pillow drops down a little bit. And now what we can do is start adjusting the dimensions of these pillowcases to create some more wrinkles. So we have two options here called shrinkage weft and shrinkage warp. And it's sort of a mouthful, and it's kind of technical terms that are used in the real world of pattern creation. But don't worry about that. Basically, it's just a percentage adjustment for the width and height of your selected pattern. So with the shrinkage weft and shrinkage warp at 100%, there's no change to the pattern at all. But if I was to increase these values to something like 110, it would increase the width and height of the pattern. So let's do that here. I can select my shrinkage weft, put that to something like 110, and same for the warp. Now you can see if we look at our pillow, we have some wrinkles happening here, but they kind of just look like a bunch of lumps. And the reason it looks like that is because we don't have a lot of resolution with our scene here, with our pattern. If I look at a mesh view here, you can see it's really low poly, just barely any detail here. We can adjust that by selecting our patterns, and in our simulation properties, we can adjust the particle distance. Now the particle distance, again, is another mouthful term. It's kind of weird the way they've named it in Marvelous Designer, but basically the lower your particle distance is, the higher poly your pattern is going to be. And the higher your particle distance is, the lower poly your pattern is going to be. So if I was to decrease this to something like 10, we'll get a lot more detail out of our simulation here. I can simulate, and you can see we're getting some of those wrinkles now. I think it's a little bit too strong though, so I'm going to select this these pillowcases here, and I'm going to decrease this to 105% for the weft and the warp, like so. So now you can see we're getting some nice fine wrinkles here. Another thing that you can do to adjust the look and style of your wrinkles is changing the type of fabric. So if I select all my pillowcases here, in my object browser, you can see they have this default fabric material. If I select that, our property editor will update with the properties for our fabric. And how I like to use this is just select a preset. So under physical properties, we can select a different preset here. And I'm going to select from this huge menu of different options. We have everything from wool, silk, leather, down to different types of cotton. So I'm going to select a cotton twill for my pillow here. And you can see right away we're getting much different wrinkles out of this. And that's a really fun way to adjust what kind of results you're getting. I like to think about my chair beforehand, and looking at my reference for this chair, I can see that this is a cotton twill texture here, something like this. And so I'm going to select cotton twill for my cushion here like I did. But if your chair was made out of something like leather in your reference, or it was made out of a silk, then you can select one of those options from your fabric dropdown. And that's it. That's how you create a nice detailed pillow. So we're basically going to do this a handful of times to create this chair here. So basically we'll create a bunch of pillows and stitch those pillows together. So let's take a look how we can stitch pillows together. If I select this first pillow we have, I'm just going to duplicate it to make my second pillow here. And I'm going to move it up in the 3D space just to get it positioned like so. And now we can stitch these two guys together. So in my 2D space, I now have my pillow liners here, and then I also have these pillowcases. So I'm going to move my liners out of the way, and I'm just going to put my pillowcases next to them. So now up in this top row, I have one pillow, liners, and then cases, and then same on the bottom row. I want to sew the pillowcases to each other, not the liners. So I'm going to select my segment sewing tool, and I'm going to go over here, and I want to stitch these two together. I can do that by just referencing my 3D window here. You can see as I move my cursor over these edges and they highlight in the 2D space, they also highlight in the 3D space. So I want to sew this end here to this end over here. So I'm going to find that in the 2D space, and that looks like it'll do. There we go. So these guys have been stitched together and there's no crossing. So if I hit space to simulate now, these two pillows will stitch together. And that's how we're going to go about doing the rest of the pillows. So I'm going to create the rest of the pillows here, and I'll just speed up through the process because they're all made the same way that we did the first two pillows. Alright, so with all my pillows done here, I'm ready to set it up for exporting. So to do that, I just want a little bit more detail out of these pillows, because right now they're fairly low poly. And I also want them to be generated out of quads. Right now, if I go into mesh view, you can see that these are all generated out of triangles. I would like quads for my personal workflow. So to do that, I'm going to select all my pillowcases because just to note, I'm not going to be exporting the pillow liners. Seeing as we're not going to actually see them, I just want to export the pillowcases. So with these guys selected, I'm going to come on down to miscellaneous, and there's a remesh option called remesh beta. Now because it's beta, I do recommend that you save your file here just in case it crashes. But I haven't had it crash on my end at all. So I'm going to select remesh. And now if I go over to my mesh view here, you can see it's made out of quads. It does still look like it's made out of triangles, and that's just because we can also see our liners, which we didn't change. So I'm going to right click on my liners here and select hide 3D pattern. But now you can see that our pillowcases here are all made out of quads. Really nice, clean topology. But it's not high resolution enough for me. So I'm going to select these pillowcases here, and I'm going to change my particle distance down to something really low, like 8. And that will give me a lot of detail. Once that's updated, you can see it looks kind of strange here. We've got all these artifacts and bumps everywhere. And so what we want to do is just simulate it for a second or two to let it settle down. And there we go. Now it's settled down just a little bit here. So with that, we are ready to export these cushions out to our 3D software. I'm using Blender for rendering, so I'm going to export into that. And to do it, I'm just going to select my pillowcases and come up to File, Export, and I'm again going to export as an FBX. So in this same folder here, I'm just going to call it Husk Chair Cushions, like so. I can press Save. It'll export it out and open up an Export FBX window. And just like importing, the only thing we want to check is auto scale. Now we can press OK, it'll export it out, and we can jump back into Blender. So in Blender here, I'm going to go to File, Import, Import FBX. I'm going to find the file that I just exported from Marvelous Designer, and we can press Import FBX. And now we've got our cushions. It's also given us a duplicate of our base model here, so I'm just going to select that and delete it. And now we've got our cushions in Blender. So with that, I'm ready to move on to texturing my chair. For the legs, I'm going to be using this texture from Polygon. It's the Wood Fine Veneer Walnut 005. I really like this texture, so that's what I'm going to go with for the legs. And then for the base of my chair, I want to go with the Metal Graphite Pitted 001 texture from Polygon. This again is one of my favorite textures, and I think it looks like a nice powder coat, which is going to work for our chair today. And so with the materials for the base of my chair done, now I want to move on to doing the materials for my cushions themselves. So for the cushions, I'm going to be using Polygon's new upholstery generator. If you haven't seen that yet, I highly recommend you check it out. It allows you to pretty much generate whatever type of fabric material you want to fit your specific asset. So I'm going to be using that. Now I'm using Blender, and because Blender doesn't have a built-in Substance plugin, we're going to be using the free Substance Player app. This will allow us to open our texture and then edit it within Substance Player. So I'm going to open the SBSAR file here, and we can start customizing our own fabric. Now, if you want to learn in more detail how you can use this generator, we have a full video on our YouTube page, which I'll link in the description below, that goes over all the settings within this generator. But for today, what we're going to try and do is replicate a specific type of fabric based from reference. So I'm going to open up a reference image here. And the kind of fabric I'm going to try and replicate here is a cotton twill texture. I think this will fit with our asset really well. So I'm going to put that on my other monitor while I work in Substance Painter here. The first settings I want to look at are the output size. By default, it's set to 512, and that's just so it works really fast within your viewport here. But I want to have a little bit more detail while I'm working, seeing as my machine can handle it. So I'm going to up that to 1024, and now you can really see the detail coming through with this fabric texture. Later on, when I go to export, I'm going to change that to 4K. So I'm going to go under global parameters. I want to make sure I'm using the correct workflow for my render engine. In this case, I'm using Blender, so I'm going to use metallic and roughness. And then I want to select my weave type. So I'm going to select from the drop down one of these options here that we have. Like I said, you can create a whole bunch of different types of fabric, which is fantastic. But today I want to do twill because that's my reference. And now I have this twill texture set up right away, this nice weave for twill. So I can come down in here into threads and adjust some more options, like maybe I want my thread diameter to be a bit larger, and maybe I want a little more thread diameter variation, something like this, a little bit higher. And I can also choose the look of my thread. So if I wanted a twisted thread or a untwisted thread, I'm going to leave it as twisted, as most cotton twill textures have twisted threads. And I'm going to go over to thread color. So within thread color, I actually kind of like this gray texture that we have going on here. But if you wanted something custom, like maybe you wanted a blue chair or a green chair or a yellow chair, you can go ahead and do that by selecting from the drop down of color options, or by going to the bottom and choosing your own custom color. But I'm going to leave the colors by default for now because I like those. And then the last thing that I really want to change here is the age category. Within the age, you have lots of options for really giving your fabric a lot of character, like dye fading, which is really cool. But my favorite option here is the stray fibers option. I love this. This just really helps to give your fabric a lot of use and age and character to it. So I'm going to change my resolution up to 2048 here just so I can see what I'm working on a bit better. And I'm going to increase my stray fiber frequency just to something a bit higher. I'm going to increase my fiber length and my fiber width just to get a lot of nice variation in here from these stray fibers. I'll increase the size a little bit like that. And then in here we also have option for pulled threads if you wanted that. So I'm going to enable that just so I can have a couple of those in here somewhere. And I'm going to increase the frequency just so we have some more. And you can increase the pulled thread lightness as well. So you can see as I drag that up, the pulled threads get lighter. You can see that up here really clearly. And that's pretty much all I want to change for the look. I think this matches my reference really well in terms of the weave. So I'm going to leave it there. And then last thing I want to do is go to my adjustments. So under adjustments, we have a shading option here. And within the shading option, we have a normal format option. And this is going to vary depending on your render engine. But because I'm using Blender again, I'm going to set this to OpenGL, as that's what Blender prefers. So I think I'm ready to export this texture out. So I'm going to change my resolution to 4096. And once that's done, I can come up to export and we can export your textures. So I'm going to browse to where I want to save these. I'm just going to put it in a new folder because I've got a couple of fabrics that I've already exported out of here. I'm going to select the folder, and then I'm going to change my format to PNG, like so. With that, you can hit export. It'll export all your maps out, and then we can move back on into Blender. So back in Blender here, I'm going to select my cushions, and I'm going to add in a new material, and I'm going to call it cotton twill, like so. Now I'm going to split my windows here, and I'm going to open up this shader editor. So by default, we have this principled shader, and if you have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, you can just hit Control-Shift-T with that selected, and select the base color of your fabric texture set, as well as the metallic, roughness, and normal map. And when you hit Principled Texture Setup, it will automatically load in all the textures for you. There you go. Now you can see that we've already got our texture and material working right away. It's definitely a bit too large though. You see these threads are ginormous. So I'm going to change my scale here to something like 20. Let's see how that looks. That might have been too much. Let's change it to 15 by 15 by 15. Yeah, I like how that looks. So I'm going to go to my camera view here because I've set up a camera and a few lights just to check how my materials are looking in cycles. And there we go. I'm really happy with that. And with that, now we have our own custom asset for our library. You can import this into any scene that you're working in and start set dressing. I hope you guys learned something watching this video, and I hope you guys can start making more stuff in Marvelous Designer. If you have questions regarding Marvelous Designer, please feel free to ask them in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to get back to you regarding that. If you have questions regarding the upholstery generator from Polygon, please head over to polygon.com, and you can use our support chat box to ask us any questions. For Polygon, this is Mason Menzies, wishing you all happy sewing in Marvelous Designer. Cheers.